Hello everyone. As we just got two new divisions and we haven't done the tier list in a while, I thought that's the perfect timing to get back in there and talk about where everything stands on the tier list here. And yeah, we gonna go over all divisions, putting them from S to D tier. This is mostly focused around competitive and 1v1 play. So, and it's my personal opinion. Leave me your opinions down below. What is your favorite division? What is your lowest division? And yeah, let's talk about that in the discussions. I believe balance at the moment is in a pretty solid spot. We have a couple of mechanics that still need fixing, like AA stressing out planes and helicopters when they miss with missiles and so on. Like there are still a couple of mechanic issues, but balance-wise, we are in a pretty good spot, and the tier list will represent that as well. And yeah, we're gonna start over here with the 11th parachutist of the French, and that is the division that has suffered a bit lately. Their helicopters are pretty expensive for what they do. Their Mirage got nerfed as well, so it is quite tough to play. They still have pretty strong infantry, and the airborne, like the helicopter-borne part of that is really strong. The airborne forward deployment is still pretty good as well. They get maybe a bit too few of their Sagais, which are now at least cost efficient though. And in general, I would put this division here in C tier, as it's currently not really that strong due to really expensive AA. We might see some changes there soon, but in general, not that great. Second division is the 5th Blindé, which is pretty good. It doesn't have the strongest IFVs though, which are currently quite nice to have. Its infantry is good, but the French got nerfed with the AT rocket launcher nerf a bit. They don't have insanely strong CQC infantry either, as flamethrowers got nerfed as well. So, division still strong. The AMX-30, not as much as of an all-rounder anymore, but I would still put this division in A tier. They still have strong Mistrals. The Mirage 3E nerf hit them hard though. Actually, no, let's put them into B tier. They don't have armored helicopters. They don't have the best IFVs. The MX-30s are not that strong, and the air tab really has been hit pretty hard. That, for sure, one of the biggest hits to this division. They kind of deserved it. And they struggle a bit, though, with dealing with enemy airplanes to some extent, and especially enemy helicopters a bit, as Mistrals are not quite as numerous anymore. So, yeah, B tier here for this division. As it is not the best anymore. It was for a while here up in S tier, but it has nerfed and the meta has moved elsewhere. The MX-10s are still quite nice, but with better spotting, they can be seen a lot more commonly and be shot back by your units. So MX-10s not as OP anymore, and the Milan 2 recon vehicle of theirs has been nerfed as well. So yeah, B tier this for this division, for the 5th Blindé. And the 1st UK, another division that I would put into C tier here, a bit above 11th, as they're still good all around. They miss CQC infantry though. Warriors are decent IFVs, but they're not great. They don't have armored helicopters, and they still struggle with pretty bad air and pretty mediocre AA as well. Their air tab is okay. Tornadoes are okay, but you don't get that many of those. And then infantry-wise, they're not that great. And challengers are still a bit too pricey for what they do most of the time. So, especially once stressed, they fall off quite hard because of the rate of fire issues that they have. So, yeah, 1st UK in my eyes, only a C tier division at the moment. It is playable, like both of these divisions are still playable and ranked. But in tournaments, you only bring them out in niche cases and in niche scenarios. And yeah, D tier is borderline unusable. But at the moment, I feel like we don't really have that. 2nd UK, in my eyes, on the other side of the spectrum. One main reason for this being SAS. But also still really good airmobiles coming around quickly. They get enough challengers to go through the game. You don't need more challengers than 4 or 5 anyways. They're too expensive for that. They could use a mid-range tank, but they have IVs with a couple of warriors. They have the M48s, which are at least doing a decent-ish job nowadays. And they have enough attack aircraft that are pretty annoying as well. The helicopters with the rocket helicopters are decent-ish as well. Nothing great there, but they do their job. And the recon tab is pretty good as well with the Foxes and co. So yeah, second UK, especially though to the SAS. The SAS are such early game powerhouses. They kill enemy infantry really quickly. They have, with the Stingers and high hit points, a really good anti-air against enemy helicopters that rush you, against enemy airplanes that fly low. And you can't just hit them with one artillery hit and they are down, or even helicopters sometimes struggle to kill them off. So SAS really insanely strong, buffing this division on their own up to S tier in my eyes. Outside of, if you would remove the SAS, they would immediately drop B tier. But the SAS as an opener, together with good airmobile with low 80s and co, getting this division up to S tier. And it's a really strong division. Now we go to 35th, Air Assault Brigade. A really strong deck as well. Another S tier division in my eyes. As it has really good tank and forward deploy strength. You run out of T-64s eventually, which might be a problem. And you have to be really reliant on your aircraft. Your MiG-29s are good, but you have to use them correctly as well, as your anti-air is your big weakness. That's why this is on the end of S tier in my eyes, because you can get sky bullied by F-15 decks if you play it wrong, and then you are in a bit of trouble. But you have the Akula, you have forward deploy, and you have a strong tank with the T-64 as well. Your BMD-2s have a nice autocannon as well. They miss a ATGM, but you have enough Medis and Conquerors in other forms that you can look over that a bit. And your AA against helicopter, pretty good as well. Your AA against aircraft, as I said, a bit lackluster, but you still get enough Eagles that you usually can flood the front lines somewhat. And then your MiG-29s should be in a decentish spot. You just don't have that long-range AA that other divisions get. Now we come to one of the new kits on the block, the 27th Mechanized Guards Division, which I would put into A tier. It looks maybe a bit stronger even on paper than it is in real life. Like, a lot of people were fearing that this division would be completely OP. I think it's really strong, don't get me wrong. It has T-80BVs, it has BMD-2AGs, which are nice as well. The infantry with good AT rockets as well, but it lacks that cheaper tank. Its air tab is okay, but not that great, and actually the Tor is rather underwhelming. The artillery tab is good, the infantry tab is pretty solid as well, especially the Conquerors M there helping out quite a bit as well, but you don't have those cheaper tanks that you sometimes want, and you don't have BMP3s either, like 39th has, so you don't have that long-range fire support of that. The BMP2 is nice, but you have to get a bit closer with it, and it then often dies. And you also don't have the strongest helicopter tab and so on either. Like, the helicopters, you get decent-ish numbers. The recon tab is quite nice, but not having a good vehicle there. Ground vehicle is a bit annoying, though the Soviets don't get that in general. But it's a solid deck. It's just, and it's like, it has a solid matchup against everything. I just think it's a bit too cost inefficient to be fully up there in S tier, and it's early game due to not having an insane like amount of forward deployment. You have your Spetsrazvedka, but they are not fantastic, and you're pretty limited in numbers. I think they're only A tier here. 39th goes in front of them in A tier. No, actually, sorry. 39th goes up there in S tier. Confusing that for a second. 39th, really, really strong. Only issue not having forward deployment, but they have the BMP-2Es. They have great fighters with Su-27s. Another issue here, only having MiG-29s. They have good AA setups as well. And especially the BMP-3 here. Really, really strong. Giving the infantry the extra power, and then you have a tank tab that has it all. Only issue being forward deployment, but you have the Mi-24K, which counters it a bit. And yeah, that's the weakness that it shares with 27th with my eyes. 27th being a bit better there, but you have the BMP3s, you have the better air tab in my eyes, with Su-25s and with the MiG-27s, and a more all-round AA tab. Like, the 27th with Tor being as low range as it is at the moment. I hope it gets higher range eventually, but its anti-aircraft range is a bit lackluster, and that is the annoying part here. And that brings us to 79th, which I believe is another solid B tier division. I like that division. I like the T-80BV Beasts, the IZDs, with the extra speed. You have nice forward deploy infantry as well, with some Spetsnaz GRUs to get to the front line. But your infantry tab is only mediocre. Your air tab, the MiG-31s are nice, but they don't really hit helicopters well. And you run out of supplies a bit quickly. And currently, FOBs are not worthwhile. Once FOB are worthwhile, this division gets a nice little buff in my eyes, if they ever become worthwhile in 1v1. Because the Buratino is really hard to use because of it. And once you can unlock the Buratino a bit easier, this division becomes a lot stronger in 1v1. Because it has so few supply slots that supplying a Buratino otherwise is nigh impossible. And that's a major holdback for 1v1 in my eyes. As otherwise, the Buratino is not worth it if you can't resupply it enough times. And yeah, 79th. Tunguskas are nice, but it's still maybe a slight bit too expensive. Just in general, though, a solid deck, but the infantry not quite as well-rounded as the 39th. And the tank tab also not quite as well-rounded in my eyes either. And then we come to the US divisions, where we start with the 24th, which is tough to put in for me at the moment, but I would actually put them above the 27th and 8th here. The Strike Eagle is really strong. They have decent like AA with the Chaparrals at the moment. The 2 per card Apache is nice. Yes, they have the National Guard Reservist debuff, but you get 2 per card there and so on. And the discount M1s together with all the mixes of Bradleys that you want is really, really scary as a pushing power. And running into them is super scary. The cost efficiency of this deck, especially as you have the Strike Eagle to finish off high quality enemy units. Like if the enemy has a T-80 UD, then you just Strike Eagle that. And they have to find another solution for your M1s, and everything that is lower quality just dies to that. And that is really the power of the 24th. You don't have strong forward deployment, which is for sure a setback. And your infantry tab in CQC scenarios has an issue as well, as you don't have many bigger squads. So that is a problem, and that's why I believe it's 8 here. But the pushing power of this division is really, really scary. And that brings us to 82nd, which I would put up here in 8 here as well, together with these two divisions. 82nd here, having the F-15 around. F-15 being a really good little unit to have around as an airborne division, as it protects your helicopters quite nice. It doesn't have as strong of a tank tab as the 35th in my eyes though, which is why it is only an 8 here. Its infantry also decent, but not quite Spetsnaz level. And that's the issue, because you pay a bit extra for it, and then you don't unlock quite the power. It has a really strong AAA tab, and if you can unlock the Apaches nicely and keep them alive, and then this division can be really, really scary. But in general, I would say a nice 8 tier division, and the US goes well around 8 here in general, as the 3rd US goes in there as well. Issue of the 3rd US being the somewhat the lacking of a somewhat cost-efficient anti-infantry vehicle, and cleaning up tank. Like your Bradleys are really good anti-tank vehicles with the TOW2, the Bradleys that you get in this division, but they are pretty terrible against infantry when it comes to cost efficiency. Like they still do it decently, but it's once they fight enemy infantry, but you pay a lot for the cleanup duty there. And M1 A1s and M1 A1 HAs obviously also quite expensive for that. So you have to rely on your infantry and your Apaches to do the job against infantry. But your infantry is not great at it, and your Apaches are also limited in numbers. So that is a bit of a problem, but in fighting vehicles, you are top dog. You have TOW2s, you have lovely Apaches. You don't have forward deployment in bigger numbers. You only have a couple of snipers there, which is another slight issue of this division. But yes, you have M67 police forces that can be helpful to holding the sidelines. And the M1A1HA and M1A1 are fantastic tanks. The Apaches are great, the F-15s are great, the A-10s are pretty solid. Chaparrals are still absolute scary beasts when it comes to being AA. I hope they get nerfed eventually a bit. Would make balance around AA a bit easier in my eyes if they would reduce the range of these non-radar AA units a bit. But in general, 3rd US really strong still, and will always be. And 8th, I still believe, is an S tier division here. Would put them behind the others here a slight bit, but M1's still strong here as well. Can be really scary in push power. And mech rifles and a lot of Cobras, a lot of Cobras coming around. Unlock this deck to be quite scary as well. You have a decent recon tab with everything you need. Nice forward deploy recon units there as well to get into places. Not having anti-tank on them is a bit annoying on your GSR infantry, but you still get a decent number of them. And it's just such a nice workhorse. F-16's a bit annoying, but you get the iHawk for long-range AA, so your A-10s and so on still can fly nicely. And you get M1A1s as well, which you don't unlock in 24th. So the M1 and then the M1A1 combo is really strong, stronger than the M1 into M1 IP that you get in 24th. And yeah, not having Bradleys is a bit annoying, but you get decent enough ATGM power for dealing with enemy IFVs, and you still get a couple of recon Bradleys if you want to deal with that. Like, IFVs are the most annoying part against you, but you have decent enough units to deal with that, and that is the thing of this division. And then we go to 4th, which in my eyes is the best B tier division here. It is a one-trick pony, but what it does one-trick-wise is really strong. It's quite cost-efficient, but it lacks the upper-level late game. It has Fallschirmjägers, it has a lot of armored Mi-24Ds, but Mi-24Ds lose against enemy AA helicopters, lose against enemy fighters still to some extent. You don't have many fighters to protect them. If you rush well with them and the enemy is not ready, you can destroy a lot of enemies, especially on the lower levels of it. Like, this is for sure a really cheesy division on the ranked ladder. If you run into it, be prepared for dealing with a lot of armored helicopters, but they don't have the killing power of an Apache with its 20mm gun or so, and you can usually deal with it quite nicely with some mix of AA and fighters. And then the ground part of it falls apart relatively quickly as well. Like, T-55s and its Fallschirmjägers and its Modschützen keep up the pressure somewhat decently in the early game, but if you can make it into the mid to late game against this deck, it falls apart quite rapidly against cost-efficient units, as it lacks the AP to deal with heavier tanks and so on. And that is for sure an issue of this division, which is the reason why I put it into B tier. Then we come to KDA, which at the moment is in C tier. I have the feeling it might be the weakest division in the game at the moment, and really lacks infantry power, which is an issue for a deck that is so reliant on infantry. I feel like KDA should get cheaper. They are too expensive for what they do. T-62s also not great at the moment. They're decent, but they are not... They're not quite where they need to be. So the tank tab of this division, not great. Artillery tab is fantastic. And your Spetsnaz still do a decent job, but your baseline infantry, the KDA, the reservists, all a bit too cost inefficient for what they do. And against enemy IFV decks, you also struggle to kill those off a bit, and that is quite frustrating. Like, trying to deal with enemy IFVs is a bit of an issue in this deck. And air tab, you don't have great fighters. You have the books on the ground, but you can't protect your incoming bombers for forever if the enemy keeps their fighters defensively. And that is an issue, as you really need that air support at the moment to deal with enemy armored units, and it just doesn't do that well enough to get you the win. Then we come to 7th, which I believe is at the end of B tier, with the T-72s being a bit more limited in their role as an all-around tank than when they had the massive range, but they are really tanky still. And you still get some nice cheap armored helicopters in this deck. You have good AA, you have a lot of mod shots, and you have you have the Spezialaufklärer as a good forward deploy GSR infantry. And the air tap of this division is also relatively cost efficient. So 7th in my eyes, still a decent A tier all-rounder, can deal with everything. And that makes it quite scary. And it has a way better late game than 7th. While still having a decent amount of those Mi-24Ds to go around, so that you can start with them if you want to, and Spezialaufklärer they're going around as well. So yeah, 7th for sure, still a pretty scary deck, on the right map especially. If it's really long range, then the T-72s at the moment fall off, but if they can come into range against your tanks, then you will have an issue. And you still have some T-55s, the AM2s and the AM2Bs, do something on the long range. Like, they're not terrible there. So yeah, this interesting mix between T-72s as your brawler frontline tank and your T-55 AM2s as your sniper tanks is really cool in 7th. I really enjoy this division, and I think it's a good A tier div at the moment. And then we come to Berliner Gruppierung, the East German Soviet Berlin division, which I would put into B tier at the moment as well. It doesn't have great IVs. It has pretty lackluster air and helicopter. Like, helicopter is fine, air is pretty lackluster, and those are pretty important at the moment. Its forward deployment is also not fantastic, it's okay. And it has a decent amount of tanks going around as well. T-64 DVs and TADBs are still quite solid. And you get, with those two cards, in decentish numbers as well. But the Buratino, not super useful at the moment. Its artillery tap is mediocre otherwise. And yeah, its infantry doesn't play as much of a role as in previous metas, and especially the lack of a good IV currently hurting this division a bit. So, unlike where it was in the zombie meta, I believe this division has fallen off a bit. It's still a decent all-rounder, but the things that make the difference at the moment on the upper end, it just doesn't quite have. So B tier, I believe it is, for this division. Then we come to TKS, and here it might get a bit... Oh no, TKS, sorry. That's... I messed up a couple of... I wanted to go American and so on, but yeah, let's do 11th CAF, which I believe is another B tier division, a lower one on that, as it lacks the combined arms. What it does well, but it lacks the cheap combined arms. It doesn't have a cheap tank. It has an M1A1, and that is it. So no cheap enough tanks here in that are higher quality that you want to use really for this division. And like no Leo 1s or so. If it would get a formation of Leo 1s, this, even 1A1s, it would go up a lot in my eyes. But that it doesn't have. It lacks ATGM teams to some extent. And you get only low amount of Bradley recons there as well. Your IV is reduced to martyrs, which are okay, but you would want to have some extra Bradleys around. And even the martyrs, you don't get that many. Your infantry in general, not super insane. Your helicopter tap is decent with the TOW 2 Cobras, but they don't have armor, so they still die to strafing runs and enemy AA quite quickly, and eventually you will run out of those usually. And it just doesn't have the cost efficiency for it being such an aggressive deck. You can play it decently, like it has everything it needs, but it just doesn't have the cost efficiency for it being built around having strong recon forces and so on. Like the follow-up always costs you a bit too much, it feels like. And this is why it's end of B tier. It's still really strong in the late game. It has strong units all around. Like, yeah, you have some nice air tab units as well, based around F-16s mostly, which are currently at a pretty decent price point, but just doesn't have the ending it unit there. 119th, in a bit of a similar spot, and I would put it into B tier as well. I think it's better than the C tier division, in that it runs out of its combat arms somewhere in the middle. Like, it starts with a really strong opener, Me-24K, Spetsnaz, give you a really strong opener, but then you can't quite afford the follow-up to that. Like, your opener is better than 11th, but your follow-up is a bit of an issue as you have that jump from TO55s to KD-Us and UDs, which is really hard to afford often, whilst keeping up the pressure. And if the enemy swarms you, you start to struggle at that point because your IFVs are also lackluster. You have decent helicopter, you have a solid air tap there as well, but really pricey to use aggressively. Like, your LGBs there are pretty expensive. That's a massive issue as well. But the fighters are good though. AA is pretty nice as well, but you like some long range there. So yeah, really strong opener and really strong late game if you get there. But the mid game here with 119th is the major issue. And then we go to Berliner Gruppierung. No, not to Berliner Gruppierung. To the other one. Berliner oh god. I'm slipping on the name of my favorite division. But the West German and especially US, French and UK Berliner Defense Forces coming in here. And I believe they are at the higher end of B tier at the moment as well. I believe they're not quite up there in A because they don't have the helicopters and they don't have IFVs. They have decent enough autocannons with AMX 30s and they have, I would put them in here. They have really strong infantry. The Berlin light rifles with the recoilless rifle still really scary. The normal British rifles with the low 80 really solid, and you get some nice SAKs and some Polizeireserve and so on as well. The Green Berets in the recon tab are really helpful as well, but your air tab lacks good fighters. Your helicopter tab doesn't go super far. And your tank tab is really good all around, but yeah, no IVs and air tab that lacks fighters, and no long range AA. You have a lot of man pads, but you have no great long range AA. Everything else is quite fine. So yeah, I would put them into B tier here, and would leave it there. Maybe even put them a bit further behind here in B tier. I would say this is around where they should go. TKS on the other hand, this is a nice division. TKS has kind of everything you need. I would put it into A tier here in the rear end. It's kind of like a worse second UK, as you don't have the Challenger to step it all up to, but you have really good forward deploy infantry. You get some decent AA there as well. You have a decent fighter at least with some Mirages, and your AA there being nicely leveled up by that together with iHawks. Your strike aircraft are decent-ish as well, and yeah, you only have M48s though, and like that tank tab is a bit painful, and that's the issue for this division. Not having IFVs is okay-ish, as your infantry tab is just so good all around that you don't really need them. And if you can put up the pressure together with some helicopters, together with some more and more incoming airborne infantry, and in general just keeping up the pressure of the infantry, this division is really scary. In the previous infantry playstyle meta, this division was insanely strong in my eyes, highly underrated, but with IFVs being back in business and higher level tanks also playing a role, this division has fallen off a bit into the lower ends of A tier. Before, I might have even put it somewhere into S tier. Now it's the lower end of A tier. And then we have the two West German Bundeswehr divisions here with the 2nd Panzergrenadier, which I would put behind 4th in B tier. Leos are nice. It has decent infantry all around, but Barders, Panzergrenadiers, all still not super great, and the Leos are also not as strong as they have been once. Not having a tech helicopter issue of this division for sure. The air tab, a bit expensive in my eyes, and I feel like Tornadoes still have a bit of the short end of the stick when it comes to cost efficiency. paying quite a lot for them being maybe a bit little too like stringent and not being agile enough. Like that feels like an issue with the tornadoes to some extent in my eyes. Like they should fly the curves a bit better or something. And high altitude bombers also not being so good, and that's a lot of the tornadoes. So yeah, B tier here. It still at least has tornado AA, so it has good anti-air in my eyes. But the lack of an attack helicopter and the lack of better infantry as a Panzer Grenadier division, where you still have good IVs and you still have a decent tank, make it a B tier division only. And then we have a similar fate for 5th Panzer. With 5th Panzer's issue still being the AA to some extent. Like, it doesn't have a good fighter. And the Rolands have come better, but they're still not fantastic. And yeah, also not having the greatest infantry, like same issue as 2nd, but even a bit worse because you get fewer slots. So I would put it in the end of B tier here, whereas at a solid spot, or like in the middle of B tier. Maybe even here behind these guys. Like, put a bit further to the end of B tier and leave it at that. And yeah, this is my tier list with the 2nd UK here being in a pretty nice spot in my eyes. But the difference between this and this being bridgeable. And the issue between these and these only taking like 1 or 2 changes between S and C tier to swap it around. So let's see how the upcoming balance patches will go, and let's see how the upcoming tournaments will go as well. As in my eyes, the game is a lot of fun. We have seen a lot of matchups in the latest tournaments, and I'm really looking forward to see where the 2 new divisions slot in. And I hope you enjoyed this video as well, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye, and have a great day.